All right, ladies and gents, boys and girls, we continue with our read through the Vue.js new documentation with form input bindings. That's the juicy territory of the forms, a very important, very common, and sometimes slightly annoying problem in frontend. Well, not problem, feature. When dealing with forms on the frontend, we often need to sync the state of form input elements with corresponding state in JavaScript. It can be cumbersome to manually wire up value bindings and change event listeners. And this is an example. If we have an input, user can interact with this input, and the input has a value, and we assign it a text value to bind it to JavaScript. And there is also an event listener with a handler, which is a function which assigns the value of the target of the event to the text. So when the user types in the input, this event is triggered, and this event grabs the value of the input and assigns it to the text property, and then the text property is used as value. This is a bit cumbersome, so there is a shortcut in Vue, which is vmodel. The vmodel directive helps us simplify the above to this. So all this is done with just this. We do two-way binding of the text value to this input with vmodel. In addition, vmodel can be used on inputs of different types, text area and select elements. It automatically expands to different DOM property and event pairs based on the element it is used on. Input with text types and text area elements use value property and input event. Input type checkbox and input type radio use checked property and change event. So if we had that input type checkbox here, instead of value, we would have checked, and instead of input, we would have change. Select use value as a prop and change as an event. Note, vmodel will ignore the initial value checked or selected attributes found on any form elements. It will always treat the current bound JavaScript state as the source of truth. You should declare the initial value on the JavaScript side using Reactivity API. Basic usage, text. We have an input, vmodel message, and placeholder edit me. And then we have a message being printed here also. Hello there. Yeah, so that's two-way data binding. We type something here, and then this message gets updated, and we can use it in other parts of the component. Let's take a look at this thing. In the playground, we have a reference message, and then we have an input with a vmodel message. Simple as that. Note, for languages that require an IME, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, etc. What is this, by the way? Operative system component or program that enables user to generate characters non-natively available on the input devices. All right. Yeah. You'll notice that vmodel doesn't get updated during IME composition. If you want to respond to these updates as well, use an input event listener and value binding instead of using vmodel. All right. So for Chinese, Japanese, and so on, don't rely on vmodel, apparently. Multi-line text. We have a text area with vmodel message, and yeah, that's the same. Hello there. How are you doing? Same. Note that interpolation inside text area won't work. Use vModel instead. Ah, sure. Yeah, we can't just put things in text area and expect that to work. That makes, yeah, that text area should be treated like an input with a value. Checkbox, single checkbox Boolean value. We have this thing, typical checkbox. We have an input of type checkbox with an ID checkbox and a label with a for checkbox. And then we have a vModel checked. And this checked is either true or false. We can also bind multiple checkboxes to the same array or set value. All right, we have a ref, which is an empty array, check names. Then we have the check names here, printed. Then we have three inputs of type checkbox with values Jack, John, and Mike, with labels of the same name, and with vModel check names. Okay, so if we check those, the interesting thing to see is that before, in the input type checkbox, the vModel, the checked was true or false because we are printing it here. It was true or false, but now if we specify a specific value, then instead of being true or false, it's that value. In this case, the check names array will always contain the values from the currently checked boxes. All right. Yeah, that's a easy pattern. That feels a bit like magic. Is there any logic additional to this? Let's take a look. No, it's just that. It's just that. I'll grab this code snippet and put it in my notes because, well, it's a bit, I don't know, strange like this. So we just have a reactive array. We use it as vModel. We have these values, and then we add and remove values from this array, just like that. And that, yeah, I didn't know that worked like that. I would have said like listeners and remove manually or add manually the array values. It's good to know. Radio. We have a picked and then type radio, IDs to link to the label, and then value 1 model picked. And this picked is what is this picked? Just a value, right? We model picked value 1. Yeah. Picked is the value of the actual thing. That's something I will also copy. Let's go. Checkbox groups and radio buttons. It's pretty easy actually. But, you know, if I try to do this myself, I probably try to set some listeners and some functions to do this thing manually. All right. vModel. Select. We have a selected, we have a vModel on the select, and we have the option disabled value because it's the heading, and then the options. And the vModel is the option label, I guess. Oh, this is bad. Is this because of the dark mode? Yep. That's too bad. And the select value is this thing inside. That's again, again, I didn't know this worked like that, honestly. So I'm gonna add this thing here as a reference. Select. Oops. There you go. Note, if the initial value of your vModel expression does not match any of the options, the select element will render in an unselected state. On iOS, this will cause the user not being able to select the first item because iOS does not fire a change event in this case. It is therefore recommended to provide a disabled option with an empty value, as demonstrated in the example above. I see, okay. Yep. Multiple select bound to array. We have selected, we have vModel selected, and we have multiple. So we can choose multiple now here, right? With shift, holding shift or control. I didn't know that either, man. My multiple select. Wait, let's not copy this. Let's copy the playground thing. Look. I'm gonna do something very interesting. I'm gonna go to gist path, create a new gist, and here view multiple select. Now we're gonna do view 3 and view and form. Nah, that's enough. Let's do this. Select multiple select.view. Then we are gonna do this. There you go. And we have our git path thing here, which is available online. If it's here, multiple select, there you go. Here it is. Cool. I keep it like this for the moment. I'll do it later outside the video so that you don't get bored. But okay, if we made it an array, it works similarly as a checkbox. Very interesting. Select options can be dynamically rendered with v-for. We have a selected, we have some options, which is an array of objects with text and value, and then the select has a vModel, and the option has a v-for option in options with value option value and text option text. Also very interesting. Value bindings. For radio, checkbox, and select options, the vModel binding values are usually static strings or booleans for checkbox. So in type radio, picked is a string A when checked. In type checkbox, toggle is either true or false. Selected in this select with vModel selected with an option with value ABC selected, it's a string ABC when the first option is selected. But sometimes we may want to bind a value to a dynamic property on the current active instance. We can use vbind to achieve that. In addition, with using vbind allows us to bind the input value to non-string values. We may want to bind the value to a dynamic property on the current active instance. So input type checkbox, we have vModel toggle, true value yes, false value no. True value and false value are view-specific attributes that only works with vModel. Here, the toggle properties value will be set to yes when the box is checked and set to no when unchecked. You can also bind them to dynamic values using bind. Alright. The true value and the false value attributes don't affect the input's value attribute because browsers don't include unchecked boxes in form submissions. To guarantee that one of two values is submitted in a form, use radio input instead. Okay, I don't know this stuff. So I'm gonna write a little note. I'm gonna do this. Can use custom true and false values. Can also be dynamic values. Let's just copy these things over here. And well, as you can see, these two things are reactive, are bound to the view instance. In the radio, we can have also reactive values. Peak will be set to the value of first when the first radio button is checked and set to the value of second when the second one is checked. Select options. Select vModel selected. Inline object literal. Option value number 1 to 3. vModel supports value bindings of non-string attributes as well. In the above example, when the option is selected, select will be set to the object literal value of this thing. Alright. Modifiers. Lazy. By default, vModel syncs the input with the data after each input event. With the exception of IME composition as stated above, you can add the lazy modifier to instead sync after change events. And in an input difference between input and change. An input event occurs when the text content of an element is changed through the user interface. On change occurs when the selection, the checked state, or the contents of the elements have changed. In some cases, it only occurs when the element loses the focus or when pressing return and the value has been changed. Yes, so input triggers every time the user interacts with the input, and change triggers only when the input loses focus or when the user triggers triggers it with, for example, the enter key. Then we have dot number. If you want to use input to be automatically typecast as a number, you can add the number modifier to your vModel. This is often useful because even with input type number, the value of HTML input elements always returns a string. If the value cannot be parsed with parse float, then the original value is used. Trim, if you want white space from user input to be trimmed automatically, you can add the trim modifier to your vModel, and then vModel with components. HTML's built-in input types won't always meet your needs. Unfortunately, Vue components allow you to build reusable inputs with completely customized behavior. These inputs even work with vModel. To learn more, read later this thing. Alright, so a little break and we continue.